In this video, I'm going to go through and respond to a wonderful article that was recently brought to my attention, which is itself a response to a video I made a fairly long time ago now called Jordan Hall's Dionysian Christianity. And this was based on a conversation that I watched with Jordan Hall, who I think was a somewhat recent convert to Christianity at the time. And he was talking about how Christianity is about immersion in life and effectively a kind of affirmation of life, including all its suffering. And so this struck me because that sounded like quite a Dionysian or Nietzschean thing to say, and not so much a Christian thing to say. And so I used that video to kind of go through and flesh out what I thought about that. And so I'll put a link to that video in the description, and I'll certainly put a link to this article in the description. So this article is by Noesis, somebody I know only as Noesis. And like I said, it's a really wonderful article. And so I feel like it deserves some attention. It certainly deserves some response from me. And so, Christ versus Dionysus is the title, on the Christian orientation toward life and becoming. So I'm just going to go through and read small parts of it and respond to what I think are the key kind of points, and sort of maybe think out loud a fair bit as well. So I have a few notes that I've jotted down, but I don't have sort of fully fleshed out thoughts at the moment. So it will kind of evolve as it goes. I love this picture at the beginning, which I can only assume is a combination of Dionysus and Christ's faces. And then so I'll skip the first couple of paragraphs. I want to just start with this because this seems to me to be a good encapsulation of the Christian and the Dionysian viewpoints, or at least this is how I put them forth in my video, and this is what Noesis is responding to. So I'll read it out. At first glance, it would seem that the life of a Christian is that of a life deferred, and such is the claim of many modern acolytes of Dionysus. The Christian shirks from life, which he considers to be a reality fallen from some primordial Edenic state to which we shall return in the eschaton. Perhaps the Christian affirms the world, but with a condition: the world is to be redeemed. It is imperfect, he cannot accept it how it is. The suffering he endures is ultimately a result of sin, and as such result represents some accidental accretion to reality that is to be done away with at the second parousia. On the contrary, the Dionysian proffers a radical embrace of becoming. He rejects, or is at least agnostic of, the static future of what allegedly constitutes eternal life. As we have already said, he accepts life as it is. And so, just to interject here, that was kind of the wording that I used in my video. I was really emphasizing life as it is, because the Christian would obviously argue that life or a Christian might argue, let's say, that life in its essence and its true nature is quite different to the life that we experience here in this fallen world. So that's why I wanted to emphasize as it is, which is to say, essentially say as it is to us, right? All the life that we've actually experienced, all the life that we actually know about. So I'll continue. He embraces his fate, both weal and woe. While the fundamental orientation of his being is primarily that of joy, nonetheless he considers suffering to be an integral part of life. The sea of becoming is in a perpetual state of ebbing and flowing. Such is its natural rhythm. The Dionysian adept revels in this eternal cycle of joy and suffering. He knows that the former cannot be truly enjoyed without enduring the latter. Dionysian life is that of radical acceptance of the world of becoming, for life as it is, and more particularly that of his own life. Dionysian man continually cultivates a love of his own fate in amor fati. So I just want to say I think that's really good. I think it's a really good summary of what I was putting forward. And obviously Noesis is going to disagree somewhat with my characterization of Christianity. But I think that's a really good summary of, let's say, the Dionysian ideal, or at least how I see the Dionysian ideal. And so this goes to Noesis's kind of main point. True Christianity radically affirms life as it is. So he wants to argue that, or she, I suppose, I don't know. I don't know the gender of this writer. But they want to argue that true Christianity radically affirms life as it is. So again, as we actually experience it, this life that we are living right now, not making the argument that it's life sort of in itself, or the true life, or the divine life, or something like that we're affirming, but we're even affirming the life that we're actually living. Also, I just wanted to note here, so they say, it is not my pretension to write a response that would necessarily satisfy Xavier, nor any self-styled Nietzschean, but merely to present what I believe to be the truth. Fair enough. But I just want to sort of clarify, I guess, that I don't style myself a Nietzschean. And so I think reading through this, the sense was that I'm calling myself a Nietzschean and kind of going to battle for Nietzscheanism or vitalism or something like that. But I wouldn't claim those labels, although I certainly feel an affinity to Nietzsche's philosophy. And yes, so I appreciate this next paragraph as well, because I don't have a particular rancor or resentment toward Christianity, and so I'm glad that did come through in my initial video. In fact, on the whole, I think it's a very, very good thing. So that in itself kind of sets me apart from Nietzsche. But of course, it can also be used in a very bad way, and ultimately, I don't think it's the best thing. So that's obviously the position that I'm staking here. So yeah, Noesis is just pointing out that the main charge that I lay at the foot of Christianity is essentially, can Christianity affirm life as it is? I think there are a few other things I talked about in that video, but this is the focus of this article. And so yeah, I talked a bit about in the video. I talked a bit about the role that suffering plays in Christianity, and essentially I was arguing that suffering isn't affirmed for its own sake, if you will, or it isn't affirmed as a necessary, inextricable part of life or existence, but it's affirmed kind of instrumentally. It's affirmed as a way to gain salvation from suffering forever. And so that's the meaning of the sacrifice of Christ, and that's the meaning of our participation in that sacrifice, to the extent that we endure suffering, or even kind of bring suffering on ourselves in following Christ. And so that's a bit different from kind of saying, I affirm suffering in as much as it's part of life itself, because that's saying that suffering is a tool, or it's something to use, or it's something to use it's not only something to use, but it's something to use to get beyond itself, to get beyond suffering. So that's the kind of point that I was trying to make. So we're more or less in agreement so far. So yeah, he or they put it in a better way. Xavier contends that for Christianity, the meaning of suffering is primarily redemptive or soteriological. So yeah, that's what I was saying. It's for the purposes of redemption. It's the purposes of salvation. Yeah, instrumental, transitory. I think I used in the video, I used the term sort of partial as well. Like there's a partial affirmation of life as it is, but there's aspects of life that we aren't truly affirming or deeply affirming. We're only affirming them instrumentally. And then they say, I'll just say he says, forgive me if you aren't a man, but I'll use it in the gender neutral sense. So as he goes on to say, as a Christian, it would be unbecomingly contrarian of me to characterize the above account as false. And then points out different ways that is true. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. The heavenly Jerusalem descends in its glory. In my video, I referred to the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven. In the book of Revelation, at the end of the book of Revelation, there will be no more night, there will be no more sea, which is to say there will be no more chaos. And explicitly, there will be no more death. And I think even explicitly, there will be no more pain or no more weeping. And so all those things are going to be done away with in the afterlife. So he says all of that is true, but he still wants to answer my challenge. He wants to say that Christianity still affirms life as it is, even given that we look forward to a kind of eternal life to come, or a higher life to come. We'll get to that shortly. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this part, although I found it really fascinating. So this is a quote from Meister Eckhart. And so Noesis prefaces this by saying, the first modest step we'll take towards such an interpretation of Christianity, that's to say an affirmative interpretation, is accepting even the fallen aspects of life. And I really love this quote, so I'll read this out. And so Eckhart says, yes, that man would indeed be established in God's will, who would not wish... Let me start again. I got the emphasis wrong. Yes, that man would indeed be established in God's will, who would not wish that the sin into which he had fallen had never been committed, not because it was against God, but since through that you are obliged to greater love, and through that brought low and humbled. And so I love this because it's pointing out one of the good aspects, if you will, of sin, which is to say, if you respond to it rightly, it instills a deeper repentance, it instills a deeper striving for virtue in the future, and it instills a deeper turning towards God or the divine or what have you. And so, I really like that. And then I think a little bit further on he points out that this... Where is it? Yeah, here we go. So over here. This is a step in the right direction, but it might be objected that even what has been outlined here is nothing but a slightly more sophisticated instrumentalization of life, such as was critiqued above. Because again, it's a sort of instrumental thing. We're saying that suffering is useful for instilling virtue or instilling repentance, turning to God, obtaining a state of grace, if you want to use especially kind of Catholic Christian language, and therefore to get to heaven, to escape the suffering and sin of the world. And so I think we need to go deeper than that. It seems we're both agreed on that. So at this point, I'll move on a little bit. And here's a key sort of part of the essay or point in the essay. So Noesis says, the fundamental assumption of Xavier's challenge seems to be that life as such can only be truly affirmed if it is the highest of values. And maybe I'll read the rest of this paragraph, because I think it is kind of important. It's kind of central to his argument. But such a view is surely mistaken. Drawing on Aristotle, the scholastics distinguished between so-called noble goods and instrumental goods. The latter are valued only in so far as they serve a means to a higher end, whereas the former are desired for their own sake. However, to be desired for its own sake is not to say that something represents the highest end or summum bonum. Something can be an end in itself without being the highest of all possible ends. Xavier's challenge, however, seems to imply that in denying life as it is, the status of being the highest value, Christianity cannot fully affirm it. And this would suggest that ends not constituting the highest end cannot be truly affirmed. Such a conclusion, however, is truly absurd. While maintaining that Christianity affirms life, we don't believe it inconsistent to deny life the title of constituting the highest value. Okay, so the basic idea here is that two things can be ends, and one can be a greater end than the other, and one can even be kind of in a certain way for the sake of the other, but yet not merely for the sake of the other. It's still got value in its own right. It can still be fully, I guess, affirmed in its own right, and that does seem true. So there are a couple of examples a bit further down, and I'll get to those in a second. I was kind of thinking of ones, sort of trying to think of ones more from everyday life. One that I thought about was, and so hopefully I'm getting the essence of what Noesis is saying, but if we think about just sharing a meal with people that we love, family or friends, sharing a delicious meal, maybe at a restaurant or something like that, with lots of plates or servings, or something that's really tasty, really enjoyable. Now, and it has to be with people that you genuinely love being around as well, and you're having a fun time, lots of laughter, lots of conversation, maybe if you're philosophically inclined, a lot of interesting ideas being discussed. Now, the essential enjoyment of the food, the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of tasting all the different dishes, is valuable in itself. It is enjoyable in itself, and I would say it is valuable in itself. Some people might dispute that, the more ascetically inclined, but I would say it's intrinsically valuable. But what are you there for? You're not there essentially for the food, you're there for the company. You're there for your friends or your family members who you're sharing that time with. And the food actually helps that. The food actually enhances that. The enjoyment of eating enhances that convivial feeling that you have or that you get with these people. It stimulates conversation. And so it has a kind of instrumental purpose. And the higher value is clearly the kind of interpersonal values around being with these people, friendship or whatever it might be, or even higher in a certain way, like if you are philosophically inclined and you're sort of talking about very abstract or important ideas, so in a sort of moving away from the sensual but in very much into the intellectual or the spiritual. But there's a way in which this all holds together. So it's not that the meal is merely instrumental, it's valuable in its own right, and yet it's for the sake of something that's even more valuable. And they kind of they blend into each other, and the meal supports that more important thing. I hope that expresses in maybe a very everyday way the thought that Noesis is kind of putting forward here. You can get sort of more lofty things, or lofty ways that a subsidiary value supports a higher value. I was thinking briefly of Simone Weil and her idea about prayer and attention. And I can't remember her exact wording or how strongly she puts it, but basically her idea is that all study of any intellectual study, so like going to school for a start, but any intellectual study is kind of training the attention for the sake of prayer, for this kind of communion with God. And maybe she states it too strongly. I'm not sure, again, her exact wording, whether she makes it merely instrumental. But my sense is that it's not merely instrumental, even if it does serve that instrumental purpose. That the study is valuable for its own sake, but it also trains the mind, it hones the attention, and also it hones the attention in ways that, for instance, we might want to use it to attend to the holy, which is even a higher value than just whatever intellectual pursuit that we were engaged in. So that might be another example. Another example just might be health. The health of the body supports everything that the mind does. If you're at least radically unhealthy, your mind will be a mess. You won't be able to think clearly. If you're in too much pain, or you won't be able to think properly. And yet, health is not merely just instrumental to clear thinking or spiritual thinking or whatever. It is also valuable in its own right. So that's another one. So I wanted to bring out these examples to not even steel man Noesis' position, because I don't feel like I'm steel manning it. I feel like I actually believe it, like it is true. And I feel like that's a really great way to respond to what my video was saying, is to sort of point out the structure where you have two ends and one end is greater than the other, but that doesn't mean the other is not an end. I think that's really, really good, and I really love to see that in this. I really love to sort of come across that in this article, this essay. So let's sort of dig into this, I guess, a bit. Noesis says the fundamental assumption of Xavier's challenge seems to be that life as such can only be truly affirmed if it is the highest of values. Do I believe that? Do I assume that? I don't think I do. At least I don't consciously think I do. I consciously think the opposite. I think that there are other values higher than life. Now, there's different. The problem is life is such a ambiguous term, or it's a term that has so many different possible meanings and interpretations. So, what do we mean by life, and what do we mean by the value of life? The most basic one would simply be biological persistence. And so survival, in other words. Is survival the highest value? Does it trump all other values? Absolutely not. I absolutely would not hold that view at all. There's another sense of life which is sort of more about vitality. Philosopher Max Scheler also calls this sort of the level of noble values, vital values, the sort of courageousness and generosity of a person, the excellence of a person, the health and strength of a person. These qualities that are about living life fully. And the thing about this is that living life fully and living life vitally, it may not equate to living a long life. It may not equate to preserving your life at all costs. It may mean putting yourself in a degree of danger, of doing things which are exciting and which are courageous and which require a lot of skill and attention, and that may end disastrously for your biological persistence. So that's another sense of life. And that's a bit more complicated. But I would say there's even higher levels than that. So I would broadly agree with Max Scheler had this hierarchy of values. I've done a couple of videos about this already. But that values are kind of stacked in a hierarchy. There's higher levels than the values of life or the values of vitality. For instance, there's beauty. There's the values of justice or righteousness. There's the values of the cognition of truth or the pursuit of truth. There's the whole realm of values of the holy, which is at the top of the pyramid. And I would broadly agree with all of that. Like, all of these are higher than mere life. Now, that may seem a bit of a tangent because it doesn't seem to quite get at what Noesis is saying. Because what Noesis is saying seems to be more about states, maybe, or arenas. Arena's an awkward term, but it's the best one I can think of at the moment. What I mean by that is that life is an arena, maybe, for realizing all these different kind of values. Right? So it's because of life, because I actually am an incarnate being, like I live, I have flesh and blood, I have a mind, it's a particular mind, it's a particular body, I'm in control of my actions, more or less, that I'm able to, for instance, realize the value of justice. I can actually do things that are just, that actually influence people, right? So this is how that value comes into being in a real way, in a real sense, and so with all the other values, I think maybe the value of the holy is a bit more ambiguous, but I certainly can realize the reverence for the holy, and often the holy actually appears in the world anyway. Christians certainly would affirm that of Christ, and many would affirm it of saints. So life is the arena for realizing values. Well, that's one way to look at it. It's an arena. It's not precisely a value, at least in the sense that we seem to be looking at it here, because what we're talking about is we're talking about this life as it is versus, or its relationship to some other life or some other state or some other arena, it sounds like. So that's why I'm sort of talking about it in that way. Now, from my more Nietzschean leaning position or disposition, I suppose you could say that in that sense, life is the arena for realizing value, the only arena for realizing value. In that sense, you could say that life has the highest value. Because without it, all other values would be unrealized. Like, life gives being to things, to entities, to beings. So it has a tremendous value, an almost incalculable value, if we want to keep using the word value. And that's Nietzsche's affirmation of being. Now, Nietzsche doesn't talk in terms of values like this. That's a key difference between Scheler and Nietzsche. Scheler believes there's values that you can actually discover. Nietzsche believes that values are more or less created. But still, maybe they both agree in the sense that life supports values. Like values are incarnated in being, in life. So I just wanted to sort of qualify that maybe. I don't think I believe that life is the highest value in any sort of straightforward sense. I don't even think highest is necessarily the right word. It's like, it's the fundamental value. It's the thing that must be affirmed if anything else is going to be affirmed. Right? If you value beauty at all in any sense, then you value life. Life gives you the capacity to perceive it, and life gives material for it to be instantiated in, so it allows it to appear. Likewise, if you value ethics, morality, the same thing, right? If you value the cognition of truth, or if you value wisdom, the same thing, the very same thing. I said I'd be thinking out loud through this, so this is kind of what I'm doing. I hope that, at least Noesis, if you're watching, I hope that this tracks, and that this is at least helpful to see where I'm coming from on this. I'd love to hear your response, and if anyone else who's interested in these topics is listening too, I hope that this is kind of making sense for you, or at least triggering some other thoughts that you might be having about this and what you think about this, and so on and so forth. So let's skip forward. I don't want to spend too much time on that one point, but let's skip forward to some examples. So one of the examples that Noesis uses is Hercules. Vitalists idolize Hercules, but Hercules ends his term of existence. He ends his life with the Olympian gods. He's permitted to drink the celestial ambrosia and admitted into the company of the Olympian gods. So this is kind of like the first example of where a kind of, this vitalist affirmation of life can seg into this beyond, this heavenly beyond. Now, this is an interesting example because it depends what the Olympian gods are, right? What's happening with that story. The Olympian gods are actually rather human-like. They're rather vitalist to themselves, right? They're quite different from the image of Christ or of God the Father or the Holy Spirit. They're very violent and sensual, and those more earthly qualities. And so what does it mean to be assumed into the company of the gods exactly? Does it mean a transcendence of this life? Does it just mean a continuance of this life? What did it mean for the people who thought up this myth? But those are questions I'll just leave there. It's not that important in a way, but it's good as an example, right? So here's an example of great vitalist strength and heroism, but there's still a reward. There's still a transcendence, and there's still a sort of a heavenward movement as well. This one is very good. This one is very important. This example. When an athlete receives the prize for his striving in competition, no one refuses him his duly merited reward on the grounds that such would constitute a denial of the labor and struggle he exerted during the course of his trial. The contest, the struggle are not a mere means for acquiring the prize. After all, it is the great game, the competition, the striving of the athletes that we remember, and not the award ceremony. The latter is a celebration and affirmation of the former. The latter is a celebration and affirmation of the former. So here's at least a similar pattern to what we've been discussing. You have the one thing, and you have the thing that comes after that doesn't negate the thing. What's interesting about this example, though, is that I feel like the thing, the more important thing, the higher value is actually the competition. The higher value is actually, let's say it's a race or something like that. It's the race, and it's the victory in the race. The celebration that comes after, or the actual prize, trophy, gift, whatever it is that the athlete gets, it's kind of symbolic in a way, right? Even if it's a sort of cash prize or something, it's not what the athlete truly cares about, I would think. The athlete truly cares about victory in the race, or victory in whatever competition it is. That's the thing that's motivating. That's the thing that's motivating them. And so the reason I bring that up is that it's an interesting example to use, because if we're mapping it on to sort of life versus this life versus the life to come, it would seem that this life is the more important thing. The more important thing, not the less important thing, but the more important thing. And that the thing that comes after is a celebration and affirmation of this thing, of this life, the life that we lived, particularly if we lived it quite beautifully. Beautifully in a deep sense, not in a trivial sense, but beautifully in a sense that Christians would agree with. Spiritually beautifully. So that's interesting. That's interesting. There's another example later on to do with an artist, which I think is similar. I won't go into it now, but hopefully when I get to it, I'll mention it again because I think it has a similar structure. And so maybe I'll just hold that thought until I get to that, because then that might be good to bring that up again. Christianity teaches that this life we know shall be overcome. Like any competition, reward is promised to those who strive and overcome. And those who heroically overcome shall be rewarded with a life that transcends life, something beyond life. Actually, I should repeat that again. Those who heroically overcome shall be rewarded with a life that transcends life, something beyond life. But as in the case of the athlete who strives, this overcoming of life and the subsequent remuneration of those that strive represents the greatest celebration of a life well lived. So, again, the structure seems a bit different than merely saying that we've got two ends, and one end is kind of has an instrumental role, for the lack of a better term, in relation to the higher end, and that the higher end comes after, right? In other words, we have this life. It has tremendous value in its own right, but it's also in a way that's kind of entwined with this. It's also instrumental for what comes after, what comes next, this life beyond life, which will be a celebration of this life. But here's where I think the two structures fall away from each other, because I think that a celebration of something, and maybe this is just me, but I think that a celebration of something, generally speaking, isn't as great as the thing that it celebrates, the event, the accomplishment that it celebrates. That's the thing, right? That's the thing. And the celebration is the icing on top, right? So this might not seem too important, but the reason I bring it up is because the world to come is supposed to be better. The life that transcends life is supposed to be better than this life. And that seems like something that Noesis agrees with. I would certainly say that that's what Christianity teaches. But it seems like Noesis wants to also affirm this, that the next life is better, it's higher, it's a higher end. So this model of the celebration of this life is maybe not the best one to use if that's the case. Now, why do we reach for it? Well, I would say we instinctively reach for it because, or let me rephrase it. I think that if we reach for an example like that, it's because we already believe that this life is the most important thing. Because we already love this life that we're living right now. Because we recognize its tremendous importance. And maybe we're not too sure what to think about the next life. We don't quite know what that looks like. We don't quite understand how that could be. But we know it must be in some way a celebration and affirmation of this life. So it's got that relationship. But you see, it kind of comes out on the bottom. It comes out less important. Not unimportant, not something to just be discarded necessarily, but it's not the thing itself. Let's put it this way. Let's say I live a great life. I hope I do. Or a very good life. I come to the end of that life. And then I die. And instead of just ceasing to exist, I I have a brief sort of afterlife, or maybe in the fading moments of my consciousness, time stretches out and I get this kind of this ending period where I have the celebration of my life. I get the sense that it was good. Maybe God gives me that sense directly, that it was well done, that I ran the race, that I won the victory. And then I die, and then I cease to be. What's missing in that picture? I mean, for me, not much is missing in that picture at all. But I feel like for a Christian, something must be missing. So what is this life beyond life? Is it a different arena? Do we continue to be in the same basic way that we are here? That is to say, becoming exists, right? Like we move, we develop, we bounce around, we interact with other beings, or not. Is it a kind of nirvana in the simplistic sense of that term? It's a genuine question. This kind of gets to the heart of the issue, I think. I'm going to hold myself off though, because I do want to cover more of this article rather than just sort of talking about that part just yet, which is kind of the key part of my response. But let's go through this a little bit more. I like this. All forms of Christianity must first and foremost reject any and all ticket-like counts of soteriology. Ticket views of soteriology, which is sort of the science of salvation, are those which again serve merely to instrumentalize all that occurs in becoming as a mere means for being admitted through the pearly gates when our earthly sojourn has met its term. In other words, just believe and you're saved and you're forgiven and that's it. Just don't sin too badly and you'll get to heaven and leave this miserable life behind. Now, that's the view Noesis is rejecting. And I think rightly so. Are there elements of that in Christianity? Well, I would say yes. Noesis, I think, would probably agree, although he would say that they're not that essential to Christianity. And I don't really want to debate that in a way, because it's one can get bogged down easily in those kind of discussions, which are more a little more historical, I suppose, but also kind of interminable. What I will grant is that this view that Noesis is putting forward is a possible view of what Christianity is. We'll just assume that it is, right? This affirmative vision. And then there's a little bit of talk around universalism versus what they call nowadays infernalism, which is the notion that there is a hell that you go to eternally. Which is all very interesting stuff, but I'm going to just skip it in the interests of time. Okay, here's the artist example. So this is a good place to pause. Okay, yes. Likewise, we may adduce the example of a great artist. He feels compelled by the spirit of creativity that inspires him to create his work of art. A truly great work of art is great in itself. Truly great work of art is great in itself. Of course, since the good is diffusive of itself, diffuses itself, spreads itself out, gives itself forth. The artist will desire to communicate the beauty contained in the work to others, that it might be contemplated by them. He might thereby accrue to himself their admiration and recognition. This does not, however, render the great work of art merely an instrumental means for acquiring renown. It has value in and of itself. And then in the next paragraph, Noesis explicitly links that to this life and its relationship to the next. Life's great task is to produce therefrom as beautiful a work as possible in the time allotted to each, according to the opportunities and limitations inherent to one's own situation. So we have to have an artistic approach to life. Lovely Nietzschean Dionysian idea. Now this example of the artist, though, I feel like it's in a way similar to the example of the athlete. It has a similar structure. So you could say that the artist has these kind of ends that they're striving for, right? So they maybe one ultimate end is to gain renown. They want to acquire renown. They want to be famous. They want to be recognized. They want to be admired. And maybe another aim is that they don't really care about fame per se, but they want people to be able to enjoy the beauty of their artwork. And then there's the kind of core, which is that they love doing the art, they love making the art for its own sake. It's an expression of creativity. It's a free expression of creativity. And the art itself that they make, the artwork that they make is great in itself, is valuable in itself, right? Now, in this case, the artwork, so the free creativity is living life. And the artwork that we make is life itself, right? So this spirit of creativity and this artwork that it produces, which is to say a life that it produces, those seem to me to be the highest goods. Those seem to me to be the highest ends. The other ends aren't irrelevant. They're connected and they support it in a way, or at least if not support it, they naturally flow from it is maybe a better term. But they're not higher. One doesn't make the artwork in order to acquire renown. Even if one values the artwork for itself and values renown for its own sake, it's not that the renown is more important. It's not that the renown is higher. I would say even probably with the contemplation by others of the artwork, that is much more naturally connected to just the artwork itself being in itself. But I think that ultimately the highest value for the artist is the artwork itself. In other words, as happens for many people, they create something, not many people actually ever look at it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't stop them from striving to create it. It doesn't stop them from enjoying it and enjoying that they've created it and knowing that it exists, and just simply contemplating its beauty themselves. So Noesis says this does not render the great work of art merely an instrumental means for acquiring renown, but that's true. But it doesn't make the renown the higher. It doesn't make the renown the life to come, right? It doesn't make it the higher thing, the higher value, the higher life. It makes it something subordinate or subsidiary in some way, something that flows out of it. And again, one might imagine that one gets to contemplate one's life as a whole when one dies. Maybe for for a moment, blink of an eye, one sort of looks at and people talk like this, right? Like the life flashes by them. Or maybe they see they see the sculpture of their life, or the canvas of their life, and they see what was good, they see what was beautiful, they see what was ugly. If they've lived a very good life, they see the overwhelming beauty of that life. If they've lived a terrible life, they see the overwhelming sort of hellish ugliness of it. And then they die, they pass away, they cease to be. The thing itself was the life. The most important thing was the life. And this kind of, this sort of thing that flows out from it, that doesn't seem more important than the life itself. Actually, let's strengthen that example even more. It's not just that you die and then see your life and contemplate its beauty, but let's say you die, and in those last few moments of your consciousness, God sees your life, or everyone you've ever known sees your life, or the entire world of beings sees your life and appreciates it, and has regard for you and congratulates you, and then you die, right? Again, whichever way we kind of structure it, or whichever way we set it up, it seems that the life is the most important thing. So, where does that leave us? Let's have a look. Let's see if there's other things that I wanted to talk about in terms of just responding to the text. Okay, this is good. Kierkegaard's Night of Faith. I'll read some of this. A true affirmation requires us to go beyond what Kierkegaard terms infinite resignation. In infinite resignation, one simply surrenders the entire finite world for the infinite. Kierkegaard's Night of Faith, however, in a profound act of faith, believes that, in the infinite, he shall truly reclaim that which is finite. Nothing shall be lost. And it sort of elaborates on that. The Night of Faith believes that naught shall be lost of all finite being, of all becoming. Let's see. Yeah. All that has been brought to pass is of infinite value, not as merely some intermediate stage whereby eternal life is to be attained, neither because of the infinite pleasure of heaven shall engulf the comparatively minuscule sorrows of life in this vale of tears. So not for those reasons, but everything has infinite value. The first thing I want to say about this passage is that what it makes me think of is Nietzsche's eternal return. Now, I tend to think about eternal return a little differently to Nietzsche, in the sense that the physics that Nietzsche presupposes don't work anymore. The universe hasn't existed for an infinite time, and it won't exist in any functional state, probably for an infinite time in the future. And it probably can't repeat itself exactly anyway. So I tend to think about it in terms of what's called eternalism, which is basically the view of the theory of relativity, which is the sort of also known as the block universe. Everything just exists in space and time. Everything has its location in space and time. What I'm, from my perspective in this moment, what I call the past and what I call the future, is just as real as the present. It's just as, or at least it exists just as much as the present exists. It doesn't cease to exist when it passes by, when the present passes by, and it doesn't sort of like not yet exist when it's in the future. It exists. It just has a different location, namely in the future. Well, there's no objective future and past, but from my perspective, right, over there, which is to say in the future or in the past, just like someone that's listening to this video is spatially distant from me. Like, we're just not in the same place, but we both exist. So I tend to think about the eternal return in that sense, in the sense that my life as a whole exists. Right? It doesn't fade away. It doesn't stop. It doesn't end forever. It exists in a peculiar sense of eternal, but it eternally exists. So this is what I think about, especially reading that last sentence. All that has been brought to pass is of infinite value. Now, I wonder how that resonates for you, Noesis, if you're listening to this. Because it's not precisely the Christian view. It's the view that I tend to, tentatively, because again, I'm not a self-styled Nietzschean, but it resonates with me. You're kind of stuck with what well, I won't say what you have made, because your life's not over yet, but you're stuck with what you make. You're stuck with what you make. You're stuck with what you are. And so it's eternal. Like, your life, your finite life is eternal. And to that extent, it has infinite value. Because it doesn't stop existing, so to speak. It's part of the fabric of the cosmos. It's part of the fabric of reality. So my question would be, what does the Christian conception of eternal life after this life add to that? If we want to say that this life is fully affirmed, if we want to say that this life has infinite value, or the events of this life, all that has come to pass has infinite value, what does the Christian notion of the world to come, the life to come, the afterlife, what does it add? And so that brings me sort of to the start of this passage. Kierkegaard's Knight of Faith, in a profound act of faith, believes that in the infinite he shall truly reclaim that which is finite. Assuming that's a different conception than just the eternal return, or let's call it the eternalist return. Assuming that's a different conception, what does that actually mean? Like, what does that mean? Because in a way it sounds very beautiful. But then if I think about it for even a moment, I think, but the finite is the finite. The infinite is the infinite. The two do negate each other in a certain way. To bring the finite into the infinite in a way that's just not simply to say that, like an eternalist view of time is true and that everything that we do just exists. In a way that's not to say that, but in a way that is actually sort of to go beyond life and add to life and be a continuation in some sense of life. What does that mean? Do we know what it means? Now, I obviously haven't read enough Kierkegaard in a way, so this may have a fairly straightforward answer. It may not just be simply a rhetorical question. There may be some way to explain it, but as far as I understand it, I just can't. I can't get at that. is it not just a trying to have one's cake and eat it too? Isn't there a very real tension, maybe a insurmountable tension between the finite and the truly infinite? Anyway, I'll leave that there, but that's a lot of what, I guess that's a lot of the issue that I have with these notions of a life to come. Let's see, what is there in this part? Christianity believes that the overcoming of life itself represents life's greatest triumph and affirmation. While those who strive in this life are promised the reward of a life beyond life itself, so again, the sense of life beyond life, nonetheless it is taken for a noble good and the end in itself. And true enlightenment consists in not seeking a reward. The wise do not ask of the world to be other than it is, to simply let it be. There's a couple of things I want to say about this. And I guess the first one is somewhat what I was already saying about that previous passage. What does it mean? What does a life beyond life mean? Like, is it life? Is it essentially like this life? Or is it something inconceivably different? Because if it's inconceivably different, then how can we even talk about it? Maybe at best you can have a direct mystical intuition of it, but even then, how would you communicate it to someone else who hasn't, even granting that were possible? How would you describe a color to someone who hasn't seen, to someone who's born blind? It's a similar kind of question. From my perspective, it seems to me that life, like actual life, inherently involves violence, death, and suffering. Just because, and there's a whole can of worms, I suppose, that you could go into. And I really would love someone to argue against that directly. To make a strongest case as possible, as strong a case as possible. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. I wish someone would make that case that life can be conceived of that doesn't have these qualities, but I can't conceive of it like that. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means psychologically. I don't know what that means physically. Life is energy. It's in its very nature to strive. It's in its very nature to collide. It's in its very nature to be kind of unstable in a way. Life, dukkha, energy, will to power maybe. Although I don't simplistically believe in will to power. Like, I think there's other aspects to the life, the phenomenon of life. But yeah, I mean, in other words, if we're kind of pointing towards an arena beyond the only arena that we know, which is life, where things actually happen, right? Where people die, versions of people die, parts of people die, like cells die, like everything dies. If we're looking towards something else, like, what is that? Because it seems to me that either it's just life, and that's typically what people imagine, right? They typically imagine heaven or paradise or, the resurrection as being a continuation of life, just better, right? Less suffering, no death, or maybe no suffering, no death, and lots and lots of bliss. But I feel like when you really think about that to any degree, it starts to fall apart. A life with no suffering and only bliss? Really? First of all, how is it possible? Second of all, do you really even want that? Would it even sustain a personality? Would it even sustain a person? To me, it seems not. So then, if we can't say what we mean by a life beyond life, and I guess this is my main response, right? If this, we can't actually flesh out what this is, and if the examples that we reach for are actually examples that implicitly posit life as the highest value, in the sense that, the athlete that wins, right? The athlete that achieves victory, the artist that creates a beautiful work of art. These metaphors, these examples that valorize life above other factors, the celebration, the reward one gets, the recognition one gets, the renown, whatever. Doesn't that just mean that we don't actually know what we're striving for beyond life? That actually we actually are all vitalists in this conversation after all? That we actually just vitalists, if we want to use vitalism in like the broadest possible sense, not just sort of tied to Nietzscheanism or tied to a certain kind of cultural trend. But yeah, doesn't that just mean that we sort of innately recognize that life is the most important, like the arena of life and the lives that we individually lead, and lead together for that matter, but that this is the most important thing. This is the thing. This is the thing. There's nothing else. And if there was something else, it would just be what would you say, like something that naturally sort of flows out and flows off from the thing. or something that is the reflection of the thing. But not something that towers above it in importance. The problem with positing this life beyond life is again that if we are to imagine it, it just becomes a life, like I said, stripped of suffering and death. And what that effectively means is that it does become a condemnation of this life. And it doesn't make much sense to me to affirm suffering and death in this life. And remember, I'm saying affirm them not in some morbid sort of sadistic way, but affirm them as necessary to life itself, right? Indispensable aspects of life. Why affirm them in this life and then hope that they will be surpassed and effectively eliminated in the life to come? Why, if that life is a celebration of this life in some sense, why would that life also be devoid of those qualities? If that life is eternal in the sense of infinite duration, then it's like the award ceremony for that athlete never ends. That athlete never gets to compete again. That athlete never gets to exert his body again. And it's not a pleasant thought. It's not a higher thought than the competition that he led or that he won. If we mean life beyond life in some sort of timeless sense, atemporal sense of eternal life, again, I think we're stuck with the same problem. What does that actually mean? A truly atemporal life is not a life. I know I sort of referred to eternalism, and that might seem to be an atemporal kind of life, but if if eternalism is true and these lives that we live already, so to speak, exist, or they just exist altogether, nevertheless we experience them dynamically. And we not only experience them, but we live them dynamically. So we don't get to see them as a whole, just by the way that reality is made up, you could say, is constructed. All life, if it's lived life, is dynamic, is temporal. And so it seems like, again, we've exhausted our options. Like the eternal life beyond life is an eternal duration, which to me is simply completely undesirable. And I've written an essay about this. Maybe if I remember, I'll throw the link in the description as well, because I guess that's a kind of important part of this, because most people want that. But yeah, I mean, the two horns of the dilemma: either it is an eternal duration and completely undesirable, or it is complete atemporality, and also, well, first of all, inconceivable, and second of all, for that reason, undesirable as well, because we want to actually live. we want to dynamically live. So, I mean, that's how it seems to me. Now, I want to acknowledge something at this point. I know this has gone on a while, but that's the nature of these things, because I'm thinking out loud, unfortunately. So the cost is the time, but hopefully some of this is interesting. Now, what was I going to say? Yes. So I do want to acknowledge that for most people, the afterlife, the life beyond life, just to sort of use the phrase that you've used, Noesis, is highly, highly, highly motivating, right? So I do want to acknowledge that I am in the extreme minority, perhaps. Assuming I don't desire it, I don't think I desire it. I've thought about it a lot. I've thought myself perhaps into not desiring it because it seems to fall apart. But anyway, I want to acknowledge that for most people it's highly, highly motivating. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So here's another place where Nietzsche and I would perhaps diverge from each other. I think it can be a tremendously good thing, because that's how we live our lives within our lives. We seek something in the future. We want something that's better to move towards. And if we feel we're making good progress towards that, if we feel like things are flowing towards that, or even we're all but assured of it, whatever that good goal is within life, whatever that vision is that we have, then how do we act and how do we feel? We feel free from anxiety. We can relax. We can be more generous with our time, with our attention. We can take things a little less seriously in a bad way, right? We can be more compassionate. We can just enjoy the time that's flowing by, the moments that are occurring, because we know that things are going to be even better in the future, and that we're not struggling and we're not about to lose it. I think this particularly is why Christianity is so potent, and this maybe comes back to the ticket idea of heaven. I think that it can be so potent because, at least to a large extent, it does have that ticket idea of heaven built into it. It's not reducible to it. I don't want to make that claim, but I think that it can relieve a lot of anxiety, that idea. Now, obviously, you have hell looming over you, so if you fear that you may be going there, that's a different story. But in terms of heaven, in terms of paradise, that can be extremely motivating and can also be freeing, like freeing from sort of just anxiety and constant worry and the smallness that comes from it, right? Like the contraction, the vital contraction that comes from that, right? Someone who's assured of heaven can live life fully, can enjoy life fully in the moments that they live it. Now, I would also say, that that's not the only way. That's not the only way that you can approach that state of mind. Because I try and live that state of mind, and with some success at least. And again, I don't think that my life is eternal, except perhaps in the eternalist sense of eternal, right? In the sense that it may just exist in one piece in the block universe. But I make that piece, you know. I craft that as I go. Okay, so I like this quote. This may be one of the last things I mention here. I like this part here. One might characterize Platonism as the doctrine that all things exist, though all in their proper manner. In this way, true Platonism outdoes Nietzsche in that it affirms not simply life, but everything in whatever way it might exist. The philosophy of the future is a synthesis of Platonism and vitalism of Plato and Nietzsche. At such a thought, Nietzsche is no doubt rolling in his grave, but fate indeed loves irony. These two figures are destined to come together. Interestingly, that's kind of how I saw Max Scheler when I was really delving into him recently, as he's someone who brings Nietzsche and Plato together. And I think I have a similar orientation. Also, interestingly, like although Nietzsche does kind of make an enemy out of Plato, maybe the enemy, at the same time, there is a note. This is number 1061 from Will to Power. The two extremes of thought, the materialistic and the Platonic, are reconciled in eternal recurrence. Both are regarded as ideals. So he was consciously also, in a sense, trying to assimilate these two. Probably in a sense that isn't satisfactory to Noesis, but he finds them coming together in the eternal return, which is, which he says elsewhere, is sort of like a fusion of being and becoming. This is how being and becoming come together. This is maybe this is the only way that they come together. Now, the reason that I like this statement that Platonism is the doctrine that all things exist, though all in their proper manner, I suspect maybe I take it somewhat differently to Noesis, because I take it sort of to be that, you know, maybe values exist, like Scheler says, in their own proper manner. Maybe the forms exist. Maybe numbers sort of exist. Maybe God, in a certain sense, exists. But in their own proper manner. It's the mixing, it's the fusion of the two, or of different levels, right, that throws me off. So again, coming back to that thought about Kierkegaard's Night of Faith, bringing the finite into the infinite. Do we know what we mean when we say those words? So I like the idea that all things exist in their proper manner, but I feel like that still gives a privileged place to life, at least as far as we're concerned. The privileged place to life. Again, life is the arena where things are realized, come into actual manifestation and being. So I think that's it, to be honest. I guess I should probably sum up. Lovely little epilogue, though, about Dionysus descending from the one into multiplicity. Jesus doing a similar thing, but in a slightly different way. I love that Dionysus is integrated in some sense, even if he's not obviously the savior for Noesis. He's not particularly negative, which is really good. And so this article I feel like is really, really interesting, really potent, really powerful, really beautiful. Really brings Dionysus and Christ very close together, but not completely together. I don't think I've ever seen that happen. So how to even summarize my response? My response would be yes, that there's a possible way, if we look at sheer structure, to consider that this life is valuable in itself, and it leads on to, or is for the sake of, something that's even more valuable. That we affirm this life and we affirm the thing that is even more valuable. My response and my challenge is, what is that thing that is even more valuable? Now we could say that thing is God. That's fine. Everything exists in its own proper manner. I strive to have reverence for God, but that's different from an eternal afterlife for me. And also, I guess implicitly in that statement is the idea that what God is radically different than a finite person. So what it seems to come down to is Noesis wants to say that this arena that we exist in, that we the only one we know, is we should affirm it. First of all, we should affirm it and value it, and even perhaps it has infinite value, but it's certainly not it certainly doesn't have merely instrumental value, but it is something that gives on to, it's something that leads to, it's something that is for the sake of, and that we should strive for this life beyond life, which has more value. And again, I think that the structure is plausible, the structure works, but filling it with content is harder to do. And part of the problem is, how can you find an example that expresses that? Because any example you use is already nested within life as we know it. For instance, the athlete that wins the competition and is given the award, both of those are occurring within a life, like a concrete, tangible, interconnected life. He wins the race, let's say. He uses all his energy. He's elated. He's exhausted. He rests. He basks in the glow of his victory. He's given the reward, given the award, right? He's like greeting people, meeting people. And again, he doesn't do this forever. Presumably, he goes back to training for the next race. These are moments in life. These are parts of life, which is a whole. It seems to me that when we think of the life beyond life, we think of heaven, or whatever we want to call it. We're abstracting a part, which is a part of life, which is actually inextricably woven into the whole. And so, it's not that I think that the structure of that relationship is inconceivable. It's just that I think we have no content to fill it with. And that anything that we could refer to in order to elucidate it, we end up just referring back to life, the one arena that we know, and perhaps ever could know. And so I'll just end by saying that's okay. That's okay. You can still, I think, do all the things that are important and valuable within this one life. And I think that's a good place to leave it. So, thank you for listening to whoever listened through this. And thank you especially to Noesis for writing this article and potentially listening through this as well. I apologize for the length. But I would love to hear any feedback you have to what I've said.